Compelling, intriguing talk on Bill Bennett's Morning in America.
And a good Friday to everybody as we're right in the middle of our May 3rd program. And into the middle of the show, let's drop something that should be the center of just about every discussion about radical Islam, about jihad, about 9/11, about Benghazi, about Boston. And that is the subject of when you run across a jihadist, if you have an actual radical Muslim in front of you, what should be said about that man or woman? Has he diverted from the peaceful path of Islam and hijacked a peaceful religion and taken it in a perverse way? Or are those 9/11 hijackers, are the Tsarnaev brothers, are the people who attacked our facility in Benghazi, are they simply practicing what the Quran preaches? Into this fray with a wonderful book with exactly the right title, A Battle for the Soul of Islam. A pleasure to welcome back to Morning in America, but my first chance to meet him, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. How you doing, sir?
Great. It's great to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
Wonderful to have you. Let's start at square one. For more than a decade, we've talked about the 9/11 hijackers, who they were, what they were up to, and then every once in a while you'll get an event, as most recently Boston, that has us thinking about jihad and thinking about jihadists. Are they guilty of taking a peaceful faith in a bad direction, or are they practicing what the Quran actually tells them to do? And does this battle that you describe in your book, does it rage to this day of ancient hatreds versus a more modern quest for peace?
Yeah, there's no doubt that battle is raging. And, does their interpretation of Islam not only violate but offend us Muslims that came to America for liberty, that came to America to live a life of integrity and honesty and give back to a free country that gave us the ability to practice our faith more freely than any so-called Muslim country in the world. Absolutely, that offends us. But, the concept of hijacking, I think, gives Muslims a pass. A hijacked airplane is one that just two people could hijack and render all the passengers victims. And that's just not the right analogy in my mind, because these acts of terror are but the tip of an iceberg. And that iceberg, I actually, as an American, I've been getting a bit offended when I hear some in the media and others compare Boston, and they look at the numbers and say, well, there's only been 3,500 or so killed in terror. If you add Fort Hood, et cetera, and you compare that to gun violence, it's really not that big a deal. Well, it is a big deal because this is the flashpoint in a global war where these same Islamists, jihadists, are oppressing populations to the tunes of hundreds of millions in Iran, Saudi Arabia, now in Egypt with the Brotherhood, in Pakistan and elsewhere. So this is a battle that's raging between theocrats and those that want to live in modernity and liberalism. And it's a battle of narratives. There's a narrative out there. These guys didn't get radicalized overnight in Boston. They got radicalized over a few years. And what starts them, the final pathway, Homeland Security is going to get them in the last few days. Hopefully they missed these two. But, and if anything, we've learned that the Boston terror incident should tell us that sting operations are a good thing. But the early pathway to radicalization is where they start getting sucked into a narrative that the West is godless, that they're anti-Muslim, anti-Islam, that this free society is actually their enemy. And that narrative is just augmented in many Muslim communities, augmented by a media here that portrays Muslims as victims. I mean, after the Boston terror incident, to hear media say that, well, Muslims are afraid of a backlash, they're afraid of, that feeds into the radicalization narrative that actually creates many of these monsters.
Well, people have said exactly that. I mean, from 9/11, it's really never stopped. Where's the Million Muslim March? Where are all these peace-loving Muslims? People exactly like you, Dr. Jasser, who hated 9/11. We were in the military fighting for this country. Where are all of you? And I know that you're all around me here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, up in Washington, in New York. There are peace-loving and decent and terrorism-hating Muslims everywhere. Is the criticism that they've been too silent fair or unfair?
I think it's fair. I think it's fair because, those of us, I'm at the American Islamic Forum for Democracy. We now have a coalition called the American Islamic Leadership Coalition that includes over 20 organizations. But we pale in comparison to the bandwidth in the media to the Muslim Brotherhood legacy groups in America that are like the Council on American Islamic Relations or the Islamic Society of North America, that alphabet soup of organizations that have been around for 30 years or so, many of whom were started with Saudi petrodollars or foreign monies that are part of a global evangelical movement of political Islam to spread Islamism. And they're not about reform. They're not about advocating for American liberty as preferable to the Islamic State. And that core argument, as long as they can divert Americans away from that argument, they're going to continue to make it seem like Muslims really don't care that much about American ideas, and they're going to stay silent. And the problem is America, because it's 99% non-Muslim and protects our freedoms, in Egypt, this argument is raging much more now because they're seeing what the Brotherhood does when it takes control. So you can see Revolution 2.0 and 3.0 coming down the pike very quickly. But in the United States, our freedoms are protected. So, a lot of Muslims tell me behind the scenes, God bless you, Zuhdi, thanks for standing up to the Brotherhood groups. But, really, we're in America because we came to escape that nonsense.
Dr. Zuhdi Jasser is with us. Follow him on Twitter at Dr. 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 Zuhdi, Zuhdi, Jasser, Jasser, author of A Battle for the Soul of Islam. But a couple of minutes ago, that was something very provocative and very important. That if you're watching a talk show and there's somebody on the very attractively titled Council on American Islamic Relations, it gives the imagery of someone seeking, hands across faith. Let us come reason together. What is the term you used? Muslim Brotherhood legacy groups?
Yes, they evolved out of the Brotherhood ideology in Egypt or Syria or elsewhere and brought that here. They don't use it as a religious party name in America since we don't have religious parties in the U.S., so they camouflage it as, and look at the name, American Islamic Relations, as if American Islam should have two different relationships of two different entities that couldn't coexist.
Well, I actually have no quarrel with the meaning of the words. It involves relations. Oh, I see what you mean. America and Islam is, gotcha. It's usually like, as opposed to two divergent groups getting together. There should be no dividing line between America and Islam. Peaceful Muslims have a place here, as people of any faith do. So is it your belief, and I think it's played out all the time. I think O'Reilly had somebody from, and I love the acronym, CARE. How do you not love that? But he asked at one telling moment, he said, look, can we get a stipulation, an admission from you that radical Islam, that jihadism is the main terrorist engine threatening lives around the world? And the guy wouldn't even agree to that. So where in the world can a conversation go?
It'll go nowhere, and it's like a alcoholic that doesn't want to take the first step on a 12-step pathway that isn't dealing with the problem. They're in complete denial, and Prime Minister Cameron talked about this in Britain and began the long overdue conversation in the UK after the 7/7 bombing, where they said, geez, how did these four bombers come out of our culture? They're born here, they were homegrown. And he said, you know what? We have to retool our counterterrorism program because we were working with the wrong groups. We were working with Brotherhood legacy groups in Britain that were all about anti-Britain, anti-American, West rather, and he said, we need a program of muscular liberalism to work with the reformers within the Muslim community that are all about classical liberalism, separation of mosque and state. And if you look, every one of these groups, when I tangle with them in debate and I push them on, do you believe in the First Amendment Establishment Clause, not here in America, following the laws of the land, but do you believe Muslim majority countries in Saudi, Iran, Egypt should have an Establishment Clause? They go silent and they don't defend it because it would take away their main constituency, which are the Islamists that are a significant number, not a majority, but a significant number in the Muslim population that I think is the first steps towards that pathway of radicalization.
Telephone number is 866-680-6464. Let's do some phone action here. We're in Atlanta. Todd, hi. You're on Morning in America with Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. How are you?
Good morning. I just had a question. I'm curious as to how do you have a religion of peace that was founded by a mass murderer? When Khalid Sheikh Mohammed beheaded Daniel Pearl, he did exactly what Muhammad himself did at the Battle of the Trench and exactly what Muhammad commands Muslims to do today.
Dr. Jasser, what is the peaceful Muslim to say when he says, look, Muhammad is obviously extremely important to all Muslims, but Todd brings an interesting bit of history there that can be tough to navigate.
Yeah, I appreciate that question, but I would tell you that if Islam itself taught terrorism and beheading, the world would have imploded a long time ago. You're talking about a quarter of the world's population. You're talking about, I'd ask you to read Bernard Lewis's book on what went wrong. He talks about how in the 13th, 14th centuries into the onset of the Ottomans is when reform, when diversity sort of started to die off in the Muslim world, and that golden age where the Jews lived under peace at the time, and there were just a lot of scholarship and growth that sort of died off, and I think is the main problem. Certainly there are passages in the Quran that, Muslims are not pacifists, but the question is, do we interpret it in the way Judaism and Christianity interprets just war, and relegate it simply to a single battle in 625 A.D., or do we say it goes on into ad infinitum and profiles all Jews or all Christians or all infidels as being at war interminatively? And that's really when, in my book, I have a chapter about, how can modernists interpret the Quran and separate mosque and state? And the whole thing is to put to rest the concept of the Islamic State, because as long as the Islamic State exists, then jihad is the obligation of a citizen, is the obligation to fight against the infidel, etc. If you put to rest the Islamic State and jihad and say that, I was in the Navy 11 years. I couldn't have left the Navy in the middle of my commitment to them, and because that was a commitment I gave to my nation. And I think similarly, that took precedence over any religious commitment I would have to a faith community, not to God, but to a faith community like the Islamists, and that's what we need to reform.
It is Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. The book is A Battle for the Soul of Islam. It's been out since just last year, still out there, still available, still making a difference. God bless you, sir. Thank you. I wish you well. I've always, tried to bring clarity to these issues, and for me to do it is one thing, for you quite another. And it's a pleasure to meet you and a pleasure to have you, and continued success. I look forward to talking to you again.
Well, thank you for having me. This is so important to talk about. I really appreciate it.
That it is my pleasure. Follow Dr. Jasser on Twitter at Dr. Zuhdi, Z-U-H-D-I, Jasser, Jasser. The book is A Battle for the Soul of Islam, and that is exactly what we see before our eyes, and it's very important that the good guys win. All righty, good guys and bad guys from the week gone by. Might be time to do a little Plan B one-step. I don't think it's a good thing to start encouraging our middle schoolers to get sexually active, and it's happening. I'll tell you about it next.